Silent steel shattered. On April 4th, 1983, beneath the churning waves of the North Pacific, something deeply unsettling echoed through U.S. Navy sonar lines. Metallic bursts scattered across 4 listening stations from Guam to Alaska. Over the next 2 minutes and 47 seconds, a rapid series of unnatural, thunderous impacts rolled in, jagged, echoing thuds that cut through the ocean like screams in the dark. Analysts would later confirm these weren't natural quakes, nor the groans of shifting tectonic plates. No, these were man-made. What no one realized then was that these chilling vibrations were the death knell of the USS Falcon, a classified deep-sea surveillance sub on a silent intelligence mission. Somewhere nearly 600 miles west of Midway, the Falcon had imploded under intense pressure, its steel hull collapsing inward in an instant, sealing the fate of all 87 crewmen aboard. Nuclear dawn rising. In the bold promise of a new atomic era, the United States pledged to harness its fearful power not for death, but for life. On the grim, wind-lashed morning of Monday, May 27, 1968, families huddled at Pier 22 off Hampton Boulevard, North Virginia, as a brutal nor'easter swept through the city. Among them was Allie Boogerman, dressed in resolve and rain, her children in their Sunday best, all eyes scanning the storm-churned Chesapeake Bay. Her husband, machinist's mate first class James K. Boogerman, was aboard the returning USS Scorpion, a nuclear-powered submarine whose mission remained cloaked in secrecy. Relief had come just days earlier, on Friday, May 24th, when Navy officials confirmed Scorpion was scheduled to return at 1300 hours Monday. Now, as the wind howled and raindrops raced across the windshield, Allie clutched hope tighter than ever. The Scorpion, though nearly 8 years old, once symbolized the peak of U.S. naval innovation, a product of wartime lessons and atomic ambition. Unlike its diesel-electric predecessors, which gasped for air and crawled submerged at a mere 2 knots, the promise of nuclear propulsion offered limitless underwater endurance and power. As early as 1939, physicist Ross Gunn had envisioned this future. By 1951, Congress had funded a prototype, and under Captain Hyman G. Rickover's guidance, the pressurized water reactor was born. The USS Nautilus, laid down in 1952 and commissioned in 1954, became the first nuclear sub, shattering records and reshaping possibilities. Her success paved the way for a new generation, the Skipjack class, featuring hydrodynamic teardrop hulls optimized for stealth and speed. On the surface, these sleek vessels reached 15 knots, but submerged, they surged to 33. The third in this revolutionary fleet carried a name that would soon haunt history: USS Scorpion. Shadow Below Resurfaces. Initially authorized in 1956, the Skipjack class of nuclear-powered submarines marked a turning point in U.S. naval engineering, ushering in a new era of speed and stealth. With their revolutionary teardrop hull design and cutting-edge 5th-generation Westinghouse reactors, they became the fastest submarines in the world. When the lead Skipjack conducted her sea trials in March 1959, her exact speed was kept classified, but she remained unmatched until the Los Angeles class emerged in 1974. Each Skipjack cost around $40 million to construct, measuring 251 feet 8 inches in length, with a beam of 31 feet 7.8 inches. Displacing 3,075 long tons on the surface and 3,513 when submerged, these submarines housed pressurized water reactors that heated water to produce steam, driving geared turbines that churned out 15,000 shaft horsepower to a single screw. Capable of 15 knots on the surface and an astonishing 33 submerged, they could dive to 700 feet and stay underwater for weeks, limited only by food and provisions for their 93-man crew. Armed with 6 21-inch torpedo tubes and carrying up to 24 torpedoes, They could launch anything from the Mark 14 to the Mark 45 Aster nuclear torpedo. The third of these 6 submarines was the USS Scorpion SSN 589. Her keel was laid down on August 20, 1958, by General Dynamics Electric Boat Division in Groton, Connecticut. She was launched on December 19, 1959, and christened by Elizabeth S. Morrison, daughter of Lieutenant Commander Maximilian Mellick Schmidt, the last commander of the World War II-era USS Scorpion, SS-278, which mysteriously vanished in the Yellow Sea after January 5, 1944, likely lost to a mine. Her wreck remains undiscovered. The new Scorpion was commissioned on July 29, 1960, joining Submarine Division 62 Squadron 6. She sailed on her first mission, a 2-month NATO exercise with the 6th Fleet, on August 24, 1960. A year later, her home port shifted to Norfolk, Virginia, where she would remain for the rest of her service. Through the early 1960s, Scorpion engaged in Cold War operations, shadowing Soviet vessels, rehearsing wartime strategies, and pushing nuclear-powered espionage to its limits. These missions were often classified, but in the looming tension of the Cold War, Scorpion and her sisters stood at the quiet edge of potential catastrophe, silently ensuring that a global conflict never erupted. Critical safety compromised. On April 10, 1963, disaster struck the U.S. Navy with the sudden loss of the USS Thresher and all 129 souls aboard. As the lead ship of the Permit class, a direct successor to the Skipjacks, the tragedy sent shockwaves across both military and civilian sectors. While the Permits introduced advances, their core designs were still deeply rooted in the Skipjack lineage. The sinking of such a cutting-edge nuclear submarine just a year into service ignited massive public outrage and deep internal scrutiny. It was the first time the Navy had ever lost a nuclear-powered submarine, and it became the deadliest submarine disaster in American history. The inquiry that followed exposed a culture of risk-taking, poor inspection standards, and a near-fatal oversight. Thresher's emergency ballast blow system likely failed due to insufficient power or ice blockage caused by sudden pressure drops. As a result, the Navy was operating a high-tech fleet of potential death traps. This revelation led to the creation of the submarine safety program, SubSafe, a sweeping overhaul aimed at correcting systemic flaws. While nuclear submarine designs were still considered sound, SubSafe demanded urgent upgrades, emergency shutoff valves, improved blow systems, and reinforced piping. For the USS Scorpion, that meant limiting her dive depth to 500 feet and beginning a long, costly list of modifications. But implementation clashed with harsh realities, Vietnam War demands, Cold War tensions, and political pressure to reduce defense spending. Fully certifying every sub under SubSafe would cost $200 million, and many boats, like Scorpion, spent 40% of their time out of commission. Seeking a compromise, Admiral David L. McDonald launched the Planned or Reduced Availability Overhaul Program, testing it on Scorpion and Tenosa. The goal? Cut time and cost while deferring full safety upgrades. In 1967, Scorpion began her Reduced Availability Overhaul at Norfolk, stripped of manpower and funding. It lasted just 8 months and cost $3.2 million, $2.3 million of which went solely to reactor refueling. That left under $1 million for all other repairs, making it the cheapest submarine overhaul in Navy history. Scorpion returned to duty on October 6, 1967. After a few months of training, she set sail for the Mediterranean. On May 27, 1968, families once again waited at Pier 22, huddled in wind and rain. The submarine tender Orion sat moored, expecting Scorpion to surface and radio in as usual. At first, her absence didn't raise alarms, but by 12:40 p.m., Captain James C. Bellow, acting commander of Submarine Squadron 6, called headquarters. Scorpion had not surfaced. She had not called. What followed was a frantic effort to establish contact, met only with silence. The USS Scorpion, a nuclear-powered icon of Cold War vigilance, was gone, rust beneath silence. Following her rushed and underfunded overhaul, the USS Scorpion welcomed a new commander, Francis A. Slattery, born September 15, 1931 in Westman. A Naval Academy graduate from the class of 1954, Slattery earned his submarine credentials in 1955 and transitioned to nuclear-powered service by the end of 1958. He served aboard the famed USS Nautilus before being given command of Scorpion in October 1967 at just 37 years old. Though relatively inexperienced, Slattery was highly capable, yet the real issue was not the man in charge, but the state of his vessel. Originally, Scorpion wasn't meant for Mediterranean duty, but a last-minute collision involving USS Seawolf in Boston Harbor changed that. From the moment she crossed the Atlantic, Scorpion was plagued with failure. She racked up 109 unresolved work orders, including a potentially defective trash disposal unit latch, an innocuous component with deadly consequences if it failed at depth. She lacked sub-safe mandated safety systems like emergency blow and decentralized seawater shutoff valves. Her hydraulics were unstable, once causing the entire sub to corkscrew out of control during a dive off Puerto Rico. Over 1,500 gallons of oil leaked from her conning tower on the Atlantic crossing. Her crew gave her a grim nickname, USS Scrap Iron. In a letter home, Machinist's Mate Second Class David Burton Stone wrote of the non-stop repair work, often having to jerry-rig crucial systems. Even her refrigeration units hemorrhaged Freon so frequently she had to beg for refills at nearly every port. Water seeped into her shore power connections, sparking a small fire. Her dive depth was limited to 300 feet, less than half of design specs, and 200 feet below subsafe standards. A 1965 ultrasonic test had revealed 317 flaws in her internal welds. Repairs were scheduled for the 1967 overhaul, but never happened. Slattery knew the risk. On March 23, 1968, he submitted an emergency request for repairs, warning, the hull was in a very poor state of preservation, and that delay could seriously jeopardize the Scorpion's material readiness. But the sub continued to sea, tasked with monitoring Soviet submarines in the Mediterranean. After arriving in March, the Scorpion was rocked by a violent storm, so powerful it shook the boat even while submerged. She reached Augusta Bay on March 23rd, anchoring offshore, denied pier access over reactor concerns, promised 3 days of shore leave. Many sailors stayed aboard just to tackle mounting repairs. Stone wrote again, detailing a critical pump failure that would have sent any other nuclear sub to dry dock. His team fixed it, but new problems surfaced. On March 27th, an air conditioning compressor failed, irreplaceable while at sea. Hope the weather doesn't get too warm, he wrote home. Others were less restrained in their criticism. Radioman First Class Daniel Peedy had spent a year begging for transfer, even petitioning to join the Army, and abandoned 17 years in the Navy. On March 28th, his request was granted. He would transfer to USS Skipjack. Though he respected Slattery and knew XO David Lloyd, he made it clear. The crew had no confidence in their submarine's condition. Slattery tried to keep Petty aboard, but the order stood. That same day, Petty stepped off the Scorpion, relieved to leave the doomed vessel behind. Final silent signals. After concluding her Mediterranean deployment in early May, USS Scorpion set course for the Strait of Gibraltar. As the submarine glided through darkening waters, a sudden health crisis emerged. Interior Communications electrician Joseph Underwood began coughing up blood, fearing tuberculosis or another infectious illness. Commander Slattery and Executive Officer Lloyd weighed their options carefully. But before a decision could be made, a somber message arrived on May 16th. Sonar technician Bill Elrod's pregnant wife had gone into premature labor, and the child hadn't survived. Slattery, who had lost his own infant son 8 years prior, understood the heartbreak all too well. He arranged for Elrod to disembark in Spain and return to Norfolk, and Underwood would accompany him for medical treatment. The news spread fast, and with it came a moment of rare reflection. Many of the 99 remaining crew penned letters to their families, unaware they were writing their final goodbyes. Just before midnight on May 16th, Scorpion surfaced outside the breakwater at Rota, Spain. A Navy harbor tug approached. Elrod and Underwood stepped off the sub and waved one last time. Their letters were handed over, and the two vessels parted. The Scorpion's crew sealed the hatches, secured the fairwater doors, and dove beneath the waves, first to periscope depth, then deeper, until she vanished below the Atlantic surface. Her next orders were critical: provide cover for the departing ballistic missile sub USS John C. Calhoun by distracting two Soviet November-class subs lurking nearby. Once complete, Scorpion continued toward the Azores to monitor a Soviet task force, including a new Echo-class nuclear submarine. The operation required full radio silence and remained shrouded in secrecy. At 2300 hours on May 21st, her mission seemingly complete, Scorpion ascended to periscope depth and raised her antenna. Listening for threats, then cautiously transmitting, she attempted to contact Naval Station Rota under her call sign, Brandywine. Heavy atmospheric interference plagued the messages, but eventually she connected with a communications post in Neamakri, Greece. After over 3 hours of broken transmissions, Scorpion finally relayed her position and a series of routine updates. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. No mechanical issues, no emergencies. These would be the last words ever received from USS Scorpion. She was due in Norfolk, Virginia at 1300 hours on May 27th. But as days passed and urgent messages to the submarine went unanswered, concern deepened. Despite excuses and technical justifications, evidence suggests senior officials suspected a problem as early as May 22nd, yet no public action was taken. Only when Scorpion failed to arrive, her families waiting in storm and rain on Pier 22, did the Navy acknowledge her silence and declare her submiss. Within hours, President Lyndon Johnson was briefed. By 6 p.m., CBS Evening News broke the story to the nation. What followed was one of the largest search operations in Navy history. Over 55 ships and 35 aircraft scouring the Atlantic. But the truth was already sealed beneath the ocean. USS Scorpion was gone. Death below. Brandywine. Not everyone waiting at Pier 22 on May 27, 1968, was in the dark about USS Scorpion's silence. As the nor'easter howled across Norfolk, Radio Second Class Mike Hannon arrived at the pier and froze. Families stood clustered in the rain, holding on to hope. Hannon knew the truth. He had worked the 1600 to 2400 shift at the Communications Messaging Center on May 22nd, and he'd seen firsthand that Scorpion had failed to report in. He overheard senior officers discussing the situation openly. They knew. More chillingly, they had even intercepted acoustic signatures believed to capture the moment the sub was destroyed. For Hannon, the horror was personal. His best friend and mentor, steward's mate First Class Joe Cross, was one of the 99 souls aboard. He couldn't fathom how the Navy could let families wait at the pier, knowing the sub was likely already gone. Despite the Navy's massive search, nothing surfaced. On June 5th, USS Scorpion was officially presumed lost. By June 30th, she was stricken from the Navy's records. That same week, a formal court of inquiry convened. Over the course of the summer, 76 witnesses were called, but behind the scenes, the real investigation had already started. On May 27th, the very day the sub was declared submiss, leading the search was John Craven, director of the Navy's Deep Submergent Systems Project. Craven turned to the top-secret SOSUS network, a classified underwater surveillance system designed to track Soviet submarines. Two SOSUS arrays, one near Newfoundland and the other in the Canary Islands, had recorded a cluster of strange underwater sounds. An analysis pinpointed an area roughly 12 by 12 miles, about 400 miles southwest of the Azores. Enter the USNS Mizar, a civilian-crewed Navy research vessel, also used in the search for USS Thresher. The Mizar arrived at the coordinates on June 10th and began an excruciating search, dragging a 1,400-pound steel sled across the ocean floor. Every 30 seconds, a 35mm camera captured black and white stills using an ultra-wide 9.8mm lens. Day after day, pass after pass. Then, on October 28th, during run number 75, the images finally revealed what the Navy had feared for months. The shattered wreckage of Scorpion's bow lay twisted on the abyssal plain, silent, cold, gone, crushed by silence. Subsequent dives to the site, 9,800 feet beneath the Atlantic, revealed the shattered remains of USS Scorpion, her hull a tomb of twisted steel and haunting mystery. The bow lay eerily intact, but visibly warped by pressure. Toward the stern, however, the destruction was total. Her operations and reactor compartments obliterated, the propeller shaft ripped free, the sail sheared clean off. Her engine room had telescoped nearly 50 feet forward, as though the sea itself had crumpled her spine. Evidence suggested Scorpion remained partially intact during descent, with several compartments still sealed, until she plunged past her crush depth, approximately 1,530 feet, triggering a cataclysmic implosion. Yet the deeper question still echoes: what caused her to sink in the first place? Despite exhaustive investigation, no definitive cause was ever confirmed. The year 1968 was a brutal one for submarine forces across the globe. 4 submarines from 4 nations vanished, including the Soviet K-129, which disappeared mysteriously just 2 months before Scorpion's loss. Given Scorpion's last mission gathering intel on Soviet movements, theories of hostile action flourished, but the Navy found no torpedo signatures, no collision marks, nothing to suggest a Soviet attack. Instead, internal damage pointed to something from within. One theory proposed a malfunctioning Mark 37 torpedo had armed itself, been jettisoned, and then homed back on Scorpion, but the relatively undamaged bow, where torpedoes were stored, undermined that claim. Others drew comparisons to the Soviet Kursk, lost in 2000 to a torpedo detonation, but again, Scorpion's bow lacked the devastating damage expected from such an explosion. Attention turned to a seemingly mundane but deadly detail: her trash disposal unit, or TDU. Located near the galley, it allowed waste to be ejected from the sub once at periscope depth, but if the TDU's latch failed or was improperly sealed, it could open the sub directly to the sea. One of Scorpion's 109 unresolved repair orders involved the TDU. If it failed during use, flooding would have been immediate, and with no updated emergency seawater shutoff valves or effective emergency blow system, Scorpion may have been doomed within minutes. Her crew could have sealed watertight compartments, but it wouldn't have mattered. The water kept coming, and then the pressure crushed her. The wreck tells a silent story of brave men, faulty systems, ignored warnings, and a final fatal descent into the black. Scorpion never fired a shot in war, but her death remains one of the Cold War's most enduring mysteries. Her mission ended, her patrol eternal. Final 22. On May 22, 2018, the 50th anniversary of the USS Scorpion's disappearance, acoustic analyst Bruce Rule released a chilling new theory. The submarine's death may have begun with a hydrogen explosion during battery charging. Just 10 months after Scorpion's loss, the U.S. Navy quietly amended its Ship Technical Manual, Section 9623.71a, warning, "Do not enter the battery well while a charge is in progress." It further noted all battery cell explosions had occurred with personnel present during charging. Among the wreckage recovered by Trieste 2 were battery covers coated in debris, their blown-off condition unmistakable. Hydrogen, generated during submerged battery charging, requires scrubbers to remove, but if the sub had been in condition Baker, sealed against potential collision, gases might have built up unchecked. One spark, perhaps from clothing, was all it would take. The acoustic evidence backs this. The first sound at 18:20:44 GMT was consistent with a small internal explosion. 22 minutes later, at 18:42:34, came the unmistakable signature of a hull implosion. The timeline suggests a terrible fate. Initial blast kills those in the battery well, but others survive, especially aft, sealed behind watertight doors. But Scorpion, lacking the updated blow systems required by the subsafe program, could not recover. Flooding spread, the sub descended helplessly, pressure mounting. At 1,130 feet, she reached crush depth, imploding in 37 milliseconds. Instant death. But the crew had waited 22 minutes, trapped in steel and silence, fully aware of what was coming. While the hydrogen blast theory is compelling, the Navy still refuses to name a definitive cause. In 2012, families and veterans petitioned to reopen the investigation. It was denied. This tragedy reflects a deeper truth. Safety often takes a backseat to speed, budget, or pride. As the Coast Guard says, safety regulations are written in blood. If Scorpion's 99 souls teach us anything, it's that we must never treat human life as expendable. Their patrol may be eternal, but their sacrifice must not be forgotten.